The night unfurled like an ancient manuscript over the desert, its ink made of shadow and starlight. The wind moved with reverence, carrying whispers of something sacred. Somewhere between silence and song, Sheikh Hamdan, known to the world as Fazza, sat beneath the sky that seemed to bend closer, as though the universe itself longed to listen. He was not the prince of titles now, but of words. The crown rested on his table, the pen, in his hand, gleamed like a blade carved from thought. It was midnight, his hour of communion, his sacred ritual of poetry and prayer. The world outside slept, but his soul did not. He had always felt that midnight was not a time but a threshold, a door through which truth walks barefoot. His poetry was born in that stillness, not from ambition but from surrender. Each verse came to him like a visitation, a whisper from realms unseen. When he wrote, he was no longer writing, he was remembering. The stars above blinked like witnesses to a secret only he and the divine could share. He wrote not to impress, but to express what could not be spoken in daylight. In the glare of day, people saw a leader, a symbol, a man sculpted by duty. But under the moon's silver watch, he became something softer, a soul stripped of armor, speaking directly to the infinite. His words carried the fragrance of humility and fire, longing and light. They were not simply poems, they were confessions, crafted in the quiet language of the heart. Often, he would pause mid-line, gaze upward, and feel the stars respond. He did not imagine it, he knew it. The sky itself seemed to listen, to tilt ever so slightly, as if the constellations were leaning closer to hear what Fazza's heart was saying. The desert wind would hush, and even the falcons in their distant perches seemed to still their wings. In those moments, creation itself paused to bear witness to the rhythm of one man's devotion to truth. His verses carried echoes of the desert's soul, the patience of its dunes, the mystery of its silence. He wrote of love, not as desire but as revelation, of faith, not as duty but as discovery. His words were bridges between the seen and the unseen. Every poem he birthed under the moonlight carried within it the heartbeat of something eternal. The stars, it seemed, recognized that beat, they shimmered in applause, knowing they had found their reflection in human form. Sometimes his poetry was gentle, a lullaby to the lonely, a whisper to hearts seeking refuge. Other nights, it roared like a storm trapped within the chest of a poet too human to contain divinity. He wrote of the ache of distance and the beauty of surrender, of the fleeting nature of fame and the permanence of love. And always, always, there was silence between his stanzas, the kind of silence that was not empty but alive, filled with meaning beyond words. Those who read his poetry in the morning could feel that it was written in another world. They said his words carried a fragrance, something that touched not just the mind but the spirit. They wondered how a man who bore the weight of crowns could write like one who had tasted eternity. What they did not know was that his poetry was not escape, it was embodiment. He did not write to flee his world but to translate it into something timeless. The moon had become his confidant, a pale witness to his vulnerability. On certain nights, when the sea mirrored the sky, he would walk along the shore and let the water kiss his feet as he composed silently. Each wave carried away a verse, each gust of wind returned it transformed. He felt as though the earth and heavens were co-authors of his art. His poetry was not written on paper, it was written on air, on water, on light. And yet, beneath the majesty of his words, there was tenderness, a quiet longing that only poets understand. It was not sadness but awareness, a knowing that beauty and pain are twins. He had seen the world's triumphs and tragedies, and he wove them into his verses with compassion. His poetry did not divide, it healed. In his lines, enemies found empathy, lovers found forgiveness, and strangers found themselves reflected in his ink. His verses traveled far, crossing oceans and hearts alike. Readers in distant lands spoke his name with reverence, unaware that the same stars above them had once paused to listen to his voice. But the poet himself sought no glory. For him, poetry was not performance, it was prayer. Every word he wrote.
And yet, the story of Sheikh Hamdan's midnight poetry did not end with the dawn. The stars that once paused to listen carried his verses through the cosmos, whispering them to places where even light travels in silence. Somewhere between galaxies, his words became part of the celestial rhythm, the same rhythm that guides the tides, the same one that beats inside every heart that has ever loved. The universe had found a new song, and its name was Fazza. His poetry no longer belonged to the earth, it belonged to eternity. In the still hours of the night, when the city sleeps beneath its crown of lights, his essence still moves through the corridors of time. The moonlight falls upon the palace walls, and those who pass swear they hear the faint echo of a voice, steady, calm, divine. He is no longer writing for the world but through it. His ink has become starlight, his words, constellations. And those who gaze upward with open hearts may feel it, that quiet pulse, that soft hum of devotion that never truly fades. The poets of old spoke of inspiration as something fleeting, but Fazza had proven otherwise. His inspiration was eternal because it came from truth. He had written of love not as possession but as prayer, of life not as a journey but as awakening. His verses carried the weight of understanding, that every human soul is both poet and poem, both reader and ink. In his midnight solitude, he had discovered that to write is to remember one's divine origin. The stars paused not merely for his voice, but for the reflection of the divine within it. As years wove themselves into legend, young poets began to gather in the desert at night, reading his lines beneath the same sky that once listened to him. They did not seek fame or applause. They sought the stillness he spoke of, the place where the self dissolves into something vast and holy. They said that if you listen closely to the wind that moves across the dunes, you can still hear him reciting softly, his voice woven into the rhythm of the sand. It is not memory that lingers there, it is presence. Even the stars, ancient and immortal, seem to honor that presence still. Some nights, their glow trembles just slightly, as if stirred by a familiar echo. They remember the man who spoke to them as equals, who turned silence into song, who transformed midnight into meaning. The constellations themselves seem to shift in subtle homage, their patterns aligning for a heartbeat in shapes that resemble written verse. The universe remembers its poet. The sky, once his canvas, remains illuminated by his legacy of light. As years flowed like golden rivers of memory, Fazza carried her within him, quietly, reverently. He did not chase new light, for he already carried the first sunrise in his heart. When he stood before crowds, reciting his verses, his voice would tremble only when he spoke of dawn. Listeners would think it was reverence for the hour, but he knew